the last hour, the Prime Minister has announced the £60 million offered by the government to Greater Manchester will go into Tier 3 will be distributed to the region's boroughs after a bitter row developed. Andy Burnham said local politicians had originally wanted £90 million, which equals £15 million a month until the end of the financial year, to protect the incomes of people affected by business closures. He said civic leaders were prepared to reduce their demand for financial support to £65 million, the bare minimum to prevent a winter of real hardship. But the government stuck to its offer of £60 million. Wow, and lots of disputes and denials on either side. Who are you believing all of this? Boris or Burnham? Let's speak to Jo Michell, who's Associate Professor of Economics at the University of West England. Mike Ingram, Independent Market Strategist and Business Journalist. Mike, Jo, afternoon to you both. Mike, firstly, so who's got this right, Boris Johnson or Andy Burnham?
Well, to be honest with you, Ian, I'm a little bit disturbed this is all seen through a political lens,
True.
Which might seem ridiculous considering the forum we have right now. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'd like to believe that whichever side of the political divide you're on, you want to do the best for the people of the country. And I'm not sure this is something which is necessarily recognised by a lot of the more vocal people engaged in, you know, this current debate. Now, I would like to think that the government's desire to move Manchester into a Tier 3 status was, as they say, driven by the science, though I absolutely recognise that the science itself has evolved, shall we say, over the last 9-10 months. And a lot of people who are advocating one course of action now are now advocating something the opposite. I think the thing that needs to be pointed out here is virtually all the options on the table for anybody in government, anybody in local government, anybody in national government are bad options. And I think this was very well demonstrated in the Prime Minister's questions, which I just saw, in which Keir Starmer, I think quite rightly pointed out that this coronavirus is going to cost jobs, livelihoods, and, you know, toll on mental health and everything else that comes along with it. But then simultaneously saying that the entire country should be going into a Tier 3 lockdown. So, you know, how do you square that up? So ultimately we're all in the same situation.
And this,
and you know, I'm certainly not in an ivory tower. I'm not sipping Earl Grey, watching the rest of the world burn. You know, I've got an immunocompromised wife lying in bed not that far away from me. I've got a disabled son in a care home, and I've got a daughter who's shortly to become a doctor on the front line, you know, watching wards fill up. So, you know, just to preempt any attack on I don't care about any of this, you know, I do. I'm very much aware of what's going on.
Of course.
And I think to distill it down into a rather tawdry political argument is pretty sad.
Yeah, it's where we've sort of arrived at. Jo, over to you, Associate Professor of Economics, University of West England. It has turned rather ugly and political.
Yes, it has. I think, and I agree with Mike, that making it political like this is unfortunate and serves to undermine trust. And one of the things that we know is really important at a time like this is that there is trust between people and their government, local government, central government, different political parties. In terms of who's right and who's wrong, I agree that sort of framing this as a political fight is not entirely useful. There are two issues, I think, that are worth separating. One is the issue of, was the financial support offered sufficient? And more generally, is the financial support currently on offer across the country to people affected by the pandemic sufficient? And the other question is, do we need tighter lockdown provisions, either in Manchester, other places, or nationally? And on the first point, I do think that Burnham has a valid point, that the sum of money, although it sounds large, 60 million, is tiny compared to the sums that have been spent. And if you divide that by the number of people in Manchester and work out what it works out per person, it's a meaningless figure. So I think, and more broadly, I'm very concerned that the financial support for businesses and for individuals is being rolled back at the same time that tighter restrictions are being rolled out, not just in Manchester. So on that point, I think Burnham does have a strong position.
Who's made it political?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? We saw until quite recently a reasonable cross-party consensus. We saw the Labour Party broadly backing the Conservatives, although asking some difficult questions. But this most recent round of divisions between the government and their scientific advisors, the scientific advisors have clearly said they want a short, sharp lockdown, a so-called circuit break, and Johnson has said that's not going to happen. We've seen regional disparity. Wales has done a circuit break, England hasn't, and we've seen regional disparity in this sense of stronger regulations or stronger restrictions in different parts of the country. And I think all of those tensions, with the Labour Party now siding with the scientific advisors against Boris Johnson, has sort of push this out into the open, and inevitably once you get these kind of public arguments between different political figures, it becomes a political argument.
It's interesting because just on that last point about lockdowns, I mean, Professor Van Tam yesterday seemed to do a bit of a U-turn on that, because he said he didn't really support a national lockdown and maybe local lockdowns were the best way to go. So there's another, this is the man that did tell us, of course, that face masks don't work, and now they do. But I'm not holding that against him. Things do change and opinions do change, but that seemed to be quite a seismic change in strategy. And Mike, just on the point then, that Jo raised there, the difficulty that you're in when you're a local authority. There's no such thing as enough money, is there? When you're going cap in hand to it wasn't quite like that, but you take the point, to Westminster. I mean, there could never be enough money.
Yeah, look, and Andy Burnham's trying to do the best for the people that elected him, and that's quite right and laudable and proper. But, you mentioned yourself, I think, in the preamble, what has been the outcome of this to some extent. It's for other, civic leaders to queue up and saying, well, we want to be treated like Manchester, we want more. And at the end of the day, there is, I'm afraid, no magic money tree. This is not the government's money. This is public money. This is taxpayers' money. So, and again, we've seen unprecedented financial support. And of course, you can always have more. And unfortunately, we've been going down this path in terms of interest rates for 12, 13 years now. And now we're talking about negative rates, which most people in the investment community would suggest that, it's complete lunacy. So you have to draw the line somewhere. I mean, ultimately, I've got no doubt that Manchester and all the cities that need financial support will get as much financial support as they need. But I think in terms of signalling to the, to various authorities right in the right here and now, you need to manage expectations. And, what they don't want to do is create a situation where everybody's banging on the door saying, give us money, and then just saying, well, look, it's public money. Sure. We're running a massive deficit at the moment. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of economic contraction for 300 years. At the end of the day, none of this actually comes without cost. And we won't know what that cost is going to be, I'm afraid, for many years, until many years in the future.
And I just wonder, Jo Michell, whether it's kind of impossible to take the politics out of this. I mean, we understand that this offer of 60 million was there. Phone call takes place between Boris Johnson, Andy Burnham. Boris says, I've been to the bank, I've got you 60 million. Andy Burnham says, actually, we want 65. None of us will really know whether that was the chronology of how that unfolded. But I'm assuming it was like that. I mean, we can't blame Andy Burnham for trying for extra money. But by the same token, it does leave him in that position where he can play the political card and say, I asked for more money and the Prime Minister wouldn't give me any.
Yes, I mean, we can try and work out what happened in phone calls based on reports, but I think the bigger point here is that I would agree with Burnham's position, which the sum of money which is offered is insufficient to address the degree of hardship that the additional measures would entail. And where I do disagree with Michael is that that these are large sums of money and we're setting a dangerous precedent. Actually, I think the danger here is that across the country, financial support is insufficient. And one possible argument for avoiding this kind of regional tier system and doing something like a national shorter lockdown is that then you have to provide exactly the same financial support right across the country. Part of that lockdown.
That's the issue, isn't it, that Boris Johnson has got? I mean, Andy Burnham's only thinking of Manchester. Boris Johnson's thinking, right, I've got South Yorkshire tomorrow. Where's next? Could be Leeds, could be Birmingham, could be London. There's a lot more to come. Guys, thank you. Jo Michell, Associate Professor of Economics, University of West Midlands, and Mike Ingram, Independent Market Strategist and Business Journalist, both of us here on Talk Radio.